Hi, and thank you very much for joining us all at the World Ethical Data Forum 2022 for a wonderful and exciting mashing up of ideas. And I'm particularly happy to have a number of policymakers attending and speaking at this event, particularly from the EU. And I really admire some of the steps that the EU has been taking, particularly to protect their citizens' rights online, their human rights online. However, what I want to do today is talk about what I call the elephant in the room, which of course is how our national security infrastructure, our intelligence agencies, can subvert what should be a meaningful oversight regime within the EU and beyond that. So this is why I'll be talking about the elephant right now. By way of introduction, I used to work as an intelligence officer for the UK Domestic Security Service, MI5, way back in the 1990s, before resigning and helping my former partner and colleague David Shaler to blow the whistle on a series of crimes and incompetence that we witnessed on the inside of the intelligence agencies. I won't belabor that particular point today, but what I do want to pull from that is that having blown the whistle, having gone on the run, having lived in exile, having gone through numerous court cases, there were two very key lessons that I learned. First of all was that the media can be very easily controlled by governments and by the spies. And I did quite a deep dive into that over many years in terms of how that can work. And to this day, how that is being exploited, particularly now with the technology and the new media on the internet. The other aspect that I've taken a particular interest in is the fundamental human right to privacy. Because during the whistleblowing years, which went on for 7 years, I had to live with the idea of having no privacy whatsoever, being under surveillance and being hunted by the British intelligence agency. So moving forward from those years, which were a long time ago, I have had wonderful opportunities to meet policymakers, to meet lawyers, to meet journalists, to meet whistleblowers, campaigners, hackers, and to pull together all sorts of different ideas around why privacy is so absolutely important, and also to learn exactly what the intelligence agencies have been doing behind the scenes since the late 1990s. So I want to do a little bit of a sort of deep dive back into that. I would also say as well that the particular elephant in the room when it comes to this issue is that we do have our rights enshrined under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we in Europe have, of course, the European Declaration of Human Rights. But there is should we call it a get out of jail free card, an exemption for each country's intelligence agencies. And this comes in the EDHR, Article 10.2. And this basically means that each nation state can allow its intelligence agencies to do what it wants when it comes to protecting the national security of that country. And so we need to try and delve into the balance, the checks and balances between the right to privacy and the right to survey a society, and try and make sure that balance is working within what is supposed to be a democracy. So these are our key issues. And I would say as well that they are key issues that are not ignored by the intelligence agencies. Certainly within the UK intelligence agencies, they have been debating this balance for decades. But there is a sort of pendulum effect, depending on what the perceived threats are to our Western way of life. And the pendulum can swing in very bad ways sometimes, particularly as we saw in the noughties with the global war on terror. So I just want to skip back 20 years when the first dot-com bubble, when the first big explosion of this new technology, the World Wide Web and the internet was taking off, and to look at how the intelligence agencies reacted to it, both particularly in the US and also in the UK. And they saw this as a wonderful opportunity to hoover up all the information rather than to do targeted investigations into individuals who might be a threat to national security. In fact, this was something that NSA whistleblower William Binney, who was their senior tech director at one point, actually called the total mastery of the internet. And that is what the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, who are all part of a global grouping of friendly intelligence agencies called the Five Eyes, wanted to do to the burgeoning new internet and the burgeoning new World Wide Web, to scoop up all information and store it just in case it might be of interest in the future, which is a fairly dystopian approach to what should be targeted intelligence gathering to preemptively stop atrocities, not just hoovering up all information and to have it available post-incident to be used as evidence in a court case. And this has caused problems time and time and time again over the last 20 years. Now, I want to go back to Bill Binney because he did blow the whistle on not only this total mastery evil plan, but also the idea that he could develop programs that could specifically target people of interest without infringing their basic human rights, and they, in the USA, their constitutional rights. He developed a program, I think it was for about $1.2 million, called Thin Thread, that would do just that. But after the war on terror started, after 9/11 in 2001, this was junked, and a much more expensive program called Trailblazer was commissioned and was implemented, which hoovered up all American electronic communications. But it got worse from there. And many of we whistleblowers who were talking to each other and learning from each other's experiences were aware of this global information grab. But what was really frightening, but also incredibly empowering, were the disclosures of one Edward Snowden. And Snowden blew the whistle way back in 2013, so that's still quite a long time ago, on a whole range of different endemic spy programs developed by the West. This included PRISM, which was basically the spy agencies backdooring their way into all the major tech corporations to hoover up our information, whether those tech corporations knew or were completely unaware of what was going on. It didn't mean that their records were therefore safe. We also had Tempora, which is another appalling operation, which was the collusion between the NSA in America and the UK listening post GCHQ, Government Communications Headquarters, whereby both agencies could mainline information off all transatlantic communications cables. So everything between North America and the entirety of Europe was being hoovered up by these two intelligence agencies and being kept. Now, this is completely corrosive to all the notional domestic legislation that should have protected our rights as citizens within these countries. And finally, a less-known case was what became known as the Belgacom hack, which was Belgium Communications, which was hacked by GCHQ in the UK, again, one of Snowden's disclosures. And this caused an immense furore in Brussels, particularly, because it made EU communications vulnerable to the USA and to GCHQ, who cooperated massively. So there are all these things going on, and we should remember them and not forget them because they're a decade old, because these are ways of attack that we have seen now also go into the wild. One of the things that came out a few years after the Snowden disclosures, for example, was a disclosure on WikiLeaks, which became known as the Vault 7 files. And this was a cache of CIA stored cyber weaponry, which was then being held to deploy against targets if they chose to use it. Now, the fact that the CIA could not even keep their cyber weapons cache safe might say more about their level of security than it does about the competence of the people who managed to hack the system. But it then got published on WikiLeaks. Perhaps even more concerning is something that came out soon after called the shadow brokers deal, which was the NSA cyber weapons cache, was also hacked, this time apparently by criminals, and this time put on the dark web black market by a shadowy organization called the Shadow Brokers. So these cyber weapons were put up for sale to the highest bidder. So they could go to any hacker, any criminal around the world if they had the money to pay for these tools. So these things go on time and time again. And then the final step in that is looking at what corporate security companies do. The most notorious one, of course, is an Israeli company called NSO, which developed something called the Pegasus hack, which was a zero-click infiltration of people's smartphones. So we didn't even have to click on some dodgy link. if we just happen to use certain popular apps, they could get in and they could record pretty much tracelessly everything we were doing on our smartphones. And the big story when this came out for the first time was that about 50,000 international politicians and diplomats and civil servants, and who knows whom else, were actually known to have been hacked by Pegasus. So you can see the steps that these tools are being developed by the spies. The spies are backdooring the social media to get, and the big tech corporations to get the information they want. And then they can't even keep those sort of tools secure within their own agencies. They go on the black market. And then this new attack vector is widely available and then can be either used and adapted by corporations or can be used for criminal attacks by criminal hackers. So I suppose when I say the elephant in the room when it comes to intelligence is, as I mentioned earlier, the exemptions they are given from governmental or internationally governmental bodies from meaningful oversight. And it's great that organized international organizations like the EU bring in general data protection regulations, things like that, and other attempts to mitigate against corporate predations, such as the Privacy Shield with the USA. But it comes down to implementation too. Can we trust them to do a meaningful job? Can we trust them not to not even be aware that they might be at a certain degree of vulnerability from these sort of technologies? And I'm just talking about Western intelligence agencies. I haven't even touched on other world threats such as Russia, China, or Iran, or whatever. So it's great that these policy decisions are being made. But I think also we, as concerned citizens, need to take into our own hands ways of protecting ourselves, protecting our families, protecting our communities, our societies, and even our very democratic way of life, which there are tools out there that we can use to do this, using anonymized web browsing such as Tor, anonymized operating systems such as Tails or Cubes, using virtual privacy networks, using open source software rather than an over-reliance on American corporate software such as Microsoft or Apple. All these things need to be fed in both at the personal level and also at the policy level so that we can protect our very way of life. And this, I think, is the way of mitigating the elephant in the room, particularly open source, to push back against endemic spying, to push back against endemic data harvesting, and to give us a fighting chance individually and societally and democratically against criminal hackers too. So I would encourage everyone to have a look at some of these programs and to watch some of the other talks. Particularly, we have a lovely talk from Tor itself about how to do anonymized web browsing. There's all sorts of richness in this forum, and I hope you enjoy all of them. But please remember that it's about personal responsibility as well as also about governmental responsibility and policy and international organizations. We are in charge of our own human rights and we need to protect them and protect our loved ones and protect our societies and our way of life. Thank you very much.